The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm, golden glow on the bed where I lay. Emily's soft breathing was the only sound in the room, a gentle reminder of the peaceful moments we still shared. I watched her for a moment, taking in the way her hair fanned out across the pillow and the slight smile that played on her lips even in sleep. A pang of guilt hit me hard. My job at the advertising agency was demanding, but it wasn't just the stress of work that kept me up at night. There was something else, something I hadn't been able to shake off. I rolled out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake Emily. The floor was cool beneath my feet as I made my way to the kitchen. As I started making breakfast, the familiar routine did little to calm my racing mind. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, the new graphic designer at work. Her laugh was infectious, and her eyes seemed to see right through me. We had shared a few drinks after work, nothing more, but the way she looked at me made my heart race. John, everything okay? Emily's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, wearing one of my old t-shirts, her hair a messy halo around her head. She looked so beautiful, so perfect, and it made my guilt even stronger. Yeah, just couldn't sleep, I said, forcing a smile. Thought I'd make us some breakfast. Emily walked over and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. You worry too much, she said softly, her eyes full of concern. Try to relax today, okay? I'll try, I promised, but even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. My mind was already drifting back to Sarah. At the office, I could barely focus. My mind kept drifting back to Sarah. Her laugh was infectious, and her eyes seemed to see right through me. We had shared a few drinks after work, nothing more, but the way she looked at me made my heart race. Jack, my best friend and colleague, noticed my distraction. You all right, man? Jack asked, concern etched on his face as we sat in the break room, sipping coffee. You've been out of it all morning. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Just a rough night. Didn't sleep well. Jack gave me a knowing look. Anything you want to talk about? You've seemed off for a while now. I hesitated, the words on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to say them. No, it's nothing. Just work stress, you know how it is. Jack nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here. Thanks, Jack, I said, appreciating his concern, but knowing I wasn't ready to open up yet. The day dragged on, each hour feeling like an eternity. Finally, as the clock struck 5, I gathered my things and headed home. The drive was a blur, my mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. When I walked through the front door, the smell of Emily's cooking greeted me, a comforting reminder of the life we had built together. Hey, you're home early, Emily said, smiling as she stirred a pot on the stove. How was your day? It was okay, I replied, forcing another smile. Just glad to be home. We sat down to eat, the conversation flowing easily between us. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget about Sarah and the turmoil inside me. Emily was talking about a new project she was excited about at work, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. That's amazing, Em, I said genuinely, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, John, she replied, her smile radiant. It means a lot to hear you say that. As the evening wore on, we curled up on the couch together, watching a movie and enjoying the simple comfort of each other's presence. But even as I held Emily close, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was on the verge of unraveling. The perfection of this moment was a fragile illusion, one that could shatter at any moment. John, are you sure everything's okay? Emily asked again, her voice tinged with worry. I looked into her eyes, the guilt almost too much to bear. Yeah, everything's fine, I lied, pulling her closer. Everything's perfect. But deep down, I knew the truth, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the facade came crashing down. The next morning, the alarm buzzed, pulling me from a restless sleep. I reached over and hit the snooze button, wishing I could stay in bed all day. But work was waiting, and so was the growing tension in my chest. Emily was already up, humming softly as she got ready for her day. I watched her from the bed, feeling a mix of love and guilt. She was so full of life, so innocent in her trust. Morning, sleepyhead, she said, walking over to give me a quick kiss. I made coffee. Thanks, Em, I mumbled, forcing a smile. I'll be down in a minute. In the shower, I let the hot water wash over me, hoping it would clear my mind. But Sarah's face kept appearing, her laughter echoing in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about her, and it scared me. At the office, I tried to throw myself into work, but my mind kept drifting. Sarah walked by my desk, giving me a friendly smile that made my heart skip a beat. Hey, John, she said, pausing. Got a minute to go over the new campaign? Sure, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's go to the conference room. We sat across from each other, discussing the project. I could barely concentrate, distracted by the way she twirled a strand of hair around her finger and the sparkle in her eyes. John, are you listening? She asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. I guess sorry, I stammered. Just a lot on my mind. She looked at me, her expression softening. Is everything okay? You seem off. I sighed, rubbing my temples. It's just work stuff. Nothing to worry about. She reached out, touching my hand lightly. You know, if you ever need to talk, I'm here. Thanks, Sarah, I said, pulling my hand away gently. I appreciate it. As the day dragged on, I found myself watching the clock, eager to get home. But the drive back was filled with dread, knowing I had to face Emily with these whispered doubts gnawing at me. When I walked through the door, the house was filled with the smell of dinner cooking. Emily greeted me with a smile, her eyes bright. How was your day? She asked, setting the table. It was okay, I replied, feeling the weight of my lies pressing down on me. Just busy. She looked at me closely, her smile fading slightly. Are you sure? You've been acting different lately. I hesitated, wanting to tell her everything, but not knowing how. Yeah, just stressed from work. I'll be fine. After dinner, we sat on the couch, the TV playing a show neither of us was really watching. Emily snuggled up to me, her head resting on my shoulder. John, is there something you're not telling me? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I've just been feeling overwhelmed, but it's nothing to worry about. She pulled away slightly, looking into my eyes. You know you can talk to me, right? We're in this together. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm just trying to sort things out in my head. Emily nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Okay, just promise me you'll let me in when you're ready. I promise, I said, pulling her close again. But as we sat there in the fading light, I couldn't shake the feeling that my whispered doubts were slowly tearing us apart. The sun had just set, and a soft twilight glow filled the living room. Emily and I were sitting on the porch, enjoying the cool evening breeze. She was wrapped in a light blanket, her feet tucked under her. I sipped my drink, trying to ignore the knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. John, there's something I need to tell you, Emily said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down, avoiding my eyes. My heart skipped a beat. What is it, Em? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. I've been seeing someone, she said, her words coming out in a rush. For a moment, I just stared at her, unable to process what she had said. What do you mean? I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding distant and hollow. Emily looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I met him at yoga. His name is Mark. It started out as just a friendship, but it became more. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My mind was reeling, struggling to make sense of her words. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice cracking. I didn't want to hurt you, she replied, tears streaming down her face. I thought I could end it before it got too serious, but I couldn't. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. How long has this been going on? I asked, my anger rising. About 6 months, she said, her voice barely audible. 6 months. For 6 months, she had been lying to me. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. But beneath it all, there was a deep, aching sadness. I can't believe this, I said, shaking my head. I thought we were happy. We were, she said, reaching out to touch my hand. But something changed. I don't know when or why, but it did. I'm so sorry, John. I pulled my hand away, unable to look at her. I need some time to think, I said, standing up. I can't deal with this right now. Please, John, she said, her voice breaking. Don't shut me out. We can work through this. I still love you. I paused, my back to her. I need to be alone, I said, and with that, I walked away, leaving her sitting on the porch, sobbing quietly. I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I ended up at a small park, sitting on a bench under a tree. The night was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. After what felt like hours, I pulled out my phone and dialed Jack's number. He picked up on the third ring. Hey, John, what's up? Can we meet? I asked, my voice shaking. I need to talk. Sure, he said, sounding concerned. Where are you? I gave him the address, and 20 minutes later, he pulled up in his car. He sat down next to me on the bench, his expression serious. What's going on? He asked. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Emily's been having an affair, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. Oh man, I'm so sorry. How are you holding up? Not great, I admitted. I don't know what to do. Jack nodded, putting a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one step at a time. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the situation hanging heavy between us. Finally, Jack spoke again. Whatever happens, you're not alone. We'll get through this together. I nodded, grateful for his support. But as I sat there, staring out into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life would never be the same again. The days following Emily's confession were a blur. I moved into the guest room, unable to sleep next to her, the weight of her betrayal too much to bear. We spoke little, each of us lost in our own thoughts and pain. One evening, after another sleepless night, I decided I needed answers. I needed to know the full extent of what had happened between Emily and Mark. My mind was filled with doubts, questions that gnawed at me, refusing to let me find any peace. Emily was out, so I sat at the kitchen table, the house eerily quiet. I pulled out my laptop and began my search. I didn't want to do this, but I felt like I had no choice. I needed to understand how long this had been going on and why. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Emily's emails were filled with messages from Mark, some innocent, others not. My heart sank as I read through them, each word a dagger to my heart. There were pictures too, pictures of them together, laughing, holding hands, looking like a couple deeply in love. My hands shook as I printed out the emails and photos. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. I had given everything to our marriage, and this was how she repaid me. I knew I needed to confront her with this evidence, to hear her side of the story, but I was terrified of what she might say. When Emily walked through the door later that evening, she looked tired. She set her bag down and smiled weakly at me. Hey, John, she said softly. How was your day? I didn't answer. Instead, I laid the printed emails and photos on the table in front of her. Explain this, I said, my voice cold and steady. Emily's face went pale as she looked down at the papers. She picked them up, her hands trembling. John, she began, but her voice trailed off. Why, Emily? I demanded, my anger rising. Why did you do this to us? She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, John. I never meant for this to happen. Then why did it? I shouted, unable to control my emotions any longer. Was I not enough for you? Did our marriage mean nothing to you? Of course it meant something to me, she cried, her voice breaking. I don't know why it happened. I was lonely and Mark. He made me feel wanted again. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. Lonely. I was here, Emily. I was always here. You were here, but you weren't, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You were always working, always stressed. We drifted apart, and I didn't know how to reach you. I felt a pang of guilt, but my anger quickly overshadowed it. So you decided to cheat on me instead. That's how you fix things. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I know that now. But please, John, can't we find a way to move past this? I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so long, and felt a deep sadness wash over me. I don't know, Emily. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us filled with pain and regret. Finally, Emily spoke. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, John. Please, just give me a chance. I sighed, feeling exhausted and defeated. I need time, Emily. I need to figure out if this is something we can come back from. She nodded, wiping her tears away. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. As I walked away, heading back to the guest room, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, and a small glimmer of hope. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing for certain: our lives would never be the same again. The days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house was unbearable. Emily and I moved through the same space but lived in different worlds. Every interaction was strained, every word heavy with the weight of what had happened. We were both trying, but it was clear that the road to healing would be long and hard. One evening, after another silent dinner, Emily looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. John, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. I sighed, setting down my fork. All right, Emily, let's talk. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly. I know I hurt you deeply, and I don't expect things to go back to the way they were overnight, but I need to know if you're willing to give us a real chance to heal. I looked at her, the pain in her eyes mirroring my own. I want to try, Emily, but I can't just forget what happened. Trust is a fragile thing, and right now it's shattered. She nodded, tears welling up. I understand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust. Therapy, counseling, anything. I sighed again, feeling the weight of our situation pressing down on me. I'll think about it, Emily. But you have to understand, it's not just about going to therapy. It's about being honest and open every day. I know, she whispered. I'll do better, John. I promise. The next day, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The crisp autumn air was refreshing, and I found myself wandering through the park where Emily and I had our first date. The memories flooded back, bittersweet and poignant. As I sat on a bench, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jack. Hey, wanna grab a drink tonight? I hesitated, then replied, sure, meet you at the usual place. That evening, I found myself at our favorite bar, nursing a beer as Jack walked in. He sat down next to me, a concerned look on his face. How are you holding up? I shrugged. It's been rough. Emily wants to try counseling, but I don't know if it'll work. Jack nodded, taking a sip of his drink. It's a start, but you have to decide if you're willing to put in the effort, too. It's a two-way street. I know, I said, staring into my beer. But part of me wonders if it's even worth it. Can we really get past this? That's a question only you can answer, man. Jack replied. But if there's even a small part of you that believes you can, then it's worth trying. Back at home, Emily was waiting for me. She looked nervous, like she was expecting bad news. How was your night? She asked, trying to sound casual. It was fine, I said, sitting down across from her. I talked to Jack about everything. He thinks we should try counseling. She looked relieved. I'm glad. I really think it could help us. We started seeing Dr. Reynolds, a marriage counselor recommended by a friend. She was a stern woman with a kind face, and from the first session, it was clear that she wasn't going to let us off easy. Rebuilding trust is a long process, Dr. Reynolds said, her voice firm. It requires honesty, communication, and a willingness to be vulnerable. Are you both prepared for that? Yes, Emily said immediately, her voice steady. I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I want to try. The sessions were tough. We had to confront painful truths and buried emotions. There were moments of anger, tears, and raw honesty. But slowly, I began to see a glimmer of hope. One night, after a particularly intense session, Emily and I sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. The stars were bright overhead, a silent witness to our struggle. Do you think we can really do this? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we can try, I replied, taking her hand in mine. It's going to take time, but if we're both committed, I believe we have a chance. She squeezed my hand, a small smile playing on her lips. Thank you, John, for giving us a chance. As we sat there, I felt a tentative sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on it together. And that, I realized, was a start. The mornings started to feel a little different as Emily and I committed to rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. Trust isn't something you can repair overnight, but we both knew it was worth fighting for. Our sessions with Dr. Reynolds continued, and while they were challenging, they also brought us closer. We had to be brutally honest with each other, share our fears, and confront our insecurities. One Saturday morning, Emily suggested we go for a hike. It had been ages since we did something outdoors together, and I agreed, hoping it might help us reconnect. We drove out to a nearby trail, the air fresh and crisp. As we walked, Emily reached for my hand. I hesitated for a moment before taking it, the simple gesture feeling both familiar and new. I've missed this, Emily said softly, squeezing my hand. Me too, I admitted, feeling a small spark of hope. As we continued walking, we talked about our past, our present, and what we wanted for our future. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in a long time. That evening, we sat by the fireplace, the glow of the flames casting warm shadows around the room. Emily looked at me, her eyes reflecting the flickering light. John, can I ask you something? Of course, I replied, curious. Do you still love me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, considering my answer carefully. Yes, I do. It's been hard, and I've been hurt, but I still love you, Emily. She looked relieved, tears welling up in her eyes. I love you too, John. I'm so sorry for everything. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I know, I said, reaching out to wipe away her tears, and I'm willing to work on this, to rebuild what we had. Our evenings became filled with more conversations, some light and some heavy. We learned to communicate better, to really listen to each other. Emily started leaving little notes for me around the house, small reminders that she cared. I found myself doing the same, finding joy in making her smile. One evening, we sat down to go through old photo albums. The memories brought laughter and tears, a reminder of the journey we had shared. Remember this, Emily said, pointing to a picture of us at the beach, covered in sand. I laughed. How could I forget? You buried me so deep, I thought I'd never get out. She giggled, the sound bringing a warmth to my heart. That was such a great day. It was, I agreed, smiling at the memory. As the weeks went by, we continued our therapy sessions. Dr. Reynolds encouraged us to find new activities to enjoy together, to create new memories. We took up cooking classes, tried new hobbies, and even started a small garden in the backyard. One night, after a particularly fun cooking class, we sat on the porch enjoying the cool night air. Today was great, Emily said, leaning her head on my shoulder. Yeah, it was, I agreed, feeling content. I like that we're finding new things to do together. Me too, she said, her voice soft. It feels like we're really making progress. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace. We are, Emily. It's not perfect, and it's not always easy, but we're getting there. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about our future. As we sat there, hand in hand, I realized that rebuilding trust wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning from it, growing together, and choosing to move forward one step at a time. And in that moment, I knew we were on the right path. Spring had arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The flowers were in full bloom, and the days were getting longer. Emily and I had come a long way since the dark days of our betrayal and heartbreak. We were rebuilding, slowly but surely, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about our future. One sunny Saturday morning, Emily suggested we visit the local farmer's market. It was something we used to do often but had stopped as our relationship hit rough patches. I agreed, eager to create new memories together. The market was bustling with people, the air filled with the scent of fresh produce and flowers. We wandered through the stalls, hand in hand, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Look at these strawberries, Emily said, holding up a basket. They're huge. I laughed. Let's get some. We can make strawberry shortcake later. As we continued to explore, we ran into Mrs. Thompson, our elderly neighbor. She greeted us with a warm smile. John, Emily, it's so good to see you two together again. How have you been? We're doing well, Mrs. Thompson, Emily replied, smiling back. Just enjoying the market today. Mrs. Thompson nodded. That's wonderful. You know, it's the little things that matter the most. Cherish them. We will, I said, feeling a sense of gratitude for her words. Later that afternoon, we returned home with our baskets full of fresh fruits and vegetables. Emily and I decided to spend the day cooking together, something that had become a new tradition for us. As we prepared the strawberry shortcake, Emily looked at me with a thoughtful expression. John, I've been thinking about something. What's that? I asked, curious. I want to renew our vows, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I want to celebrate the new beginning we're creating together. I paused, feeling a surge of emotion. Emily, that's a beautiful idea. I'd love to renew our vows. Tears welled up in her eyes as she smiled. I want our friends and family to see how far we've come. I want to show them that love can be stronger than the mistakes we've made. A few weeks later, we stood in our backyard, surrounded by a small group of friends and family. The garden we had started together was in full bloom, a vibrant testament to our journey of healing and growth. Emily looked stunning in a simple white dress, her eyes shining with happiness. I wore a suit, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. As we stood before our loved ones, I took her hands in mine. Emily, I began, my voice steady. We've been through so much together. There were times when I wasn't sure if we would make it, but standing here today, I know that we are stronger because of what we faced. I promise to love you, to cherish you, and to continue building a future with you, one day at a time. Emily's eyes glistened with tears as she smiled. John, you are my best friend and my partner. We've seen each other at our worst, and yet, here we are, choosing to move forward together. I promise to love you, to be honest with you, and to never take what we have for granted. As we exchanged rings once more, a cheer went up from our friends and family. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. It felt like the fresh start we both needed. That evening, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle, we sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and talked about our future. What do you see for us, John? Emily asked, resting her head on my shoulder. I see a lot of things, I said, smiling. I see us traveling, exploring new places together. I see us continuing to grow our garden and maybe even adding a few more pets to our family. Most of all, I see us growing old together, side by side. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with love. I see the same things, and I can't wait to live every moment of it with you. As we sat there, the cool night air around us, I felt a sense of peace. Our journey had been difficult, but it had led us to this moment, a moment of true new beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that everything was going to be all right.